Fabrizio, on behalf of our audience, very eager to hear the positions of the European Union, the assessment of what is going on. I thank you for joining us, and I appreciate your time and ability to talk to us in this turbulent and interesting times at the same time. And I would like to start with the latest, maybe just slightly departing from the agenda we set up initially. It's just the news of the week. And we know that Donald Trump is notably departing from the European Union position not to engage with the Russian president after the beginning of the Ukrainian war. And in fact, we're expecting a phone call of Trump and Putin sometime soon. And I'm just wondering, from the EU, from the European position, how will the Union will be handling this shift of position of its main transatlantic partner in regards to communication with Russia and with the Russian leadership?
So, first of all, great seeing you, Yulia, and thanks for having me on the show. The position of the European Union and European leaders more broadly over the past 2 years really has been rather categorical in saying we should not entertain contacts with the Russian leadership and Vladimir Putin in particular. Then, of course, this very position has been broken in recent weeks and months, not quite in a coordinated fashion, but you will have seen, of course, the Slovakian leadership, the Hungarian leadership, and even, Germany with Scholz as well, opening up a possible line of contact. The truth of the matter is that everybody on this side of the Atlantic is aware that the ball is in Washington's court in terms of how and whether to engage with Russia. So my sense is that while we may have our own position and struggle to hold it as coherent as possible, we are all aware that our own agency and the limits of that agency are in effect dependent on what the Trump administration will decide to do. So the fact that they are changing this may or may not be surprising, but I think everybody's pretty conscious that things are going to change and we will need to somehow adjust based on what Trump will decide to do.
Fabrizio, that was my next question. And I was wondering what, in your assessment, are the main challenges to the European consensus on Ukraine, considering the change of this position in Washington, obviously. And we talked about European unity, but also European unity on Ukraine broken on several fronts with the stakeholders that you already mentioned. What do you think now, besides the change in position in Washington, maybe internal challenges to what is going to happen towards Ukrainian position of the European Union?
So I think, as has always been the case in the past 2 years, there is always an internal domestic discussion, which is different for each European country, that becomes part of the narrative on Ukraine. And as we speak, the domestic consideration has got to be one of inherent instability and uncertainty in key countries like France and Germany. And that is not necessarily defining the nature of the European consensus, but defining the strength of that consensus, meaning that it is clear that whatever Europeans are likely to say and promise to Ukraine or on Ukraine is time-bound, and it is somehow contingent to domestic developments, whether it is the formation of a government or national elections, federal elections, as in the case of Germany. The nature of that consensus has not changed. I mean, I think by and large we are talking about a consensus where we attribute to Ukraine in fact, the agency to decide the conditions of its own peace agreement, which, as you will appreciate, is in and of itself a rather cheeky assessment, because, of course, that puts the ball in Ukraine's court, but Ukraine may not have the cards to play in that regard. In practice, I think Europeans do play that kind of game, saying we will agree to whatever, and this is something, for example, the Italian Prime Minister has been saying quite frequently, we will agree to whatever peace Ukraine will think is just. But in practice, I think it's clear to all Europeans that any settlement will require an element of European engagement, from reconstruction to peacekeeping, and I would add, above all, the big question mark, which to me is the biggest of all strategically, which is the one on enlargement of NATO, although that is less of a question mark, but more importantly of the European Union.
This is very interesting, Fabrizio, and I have two questions stemming from what you just said. You mentioned that Europe is kind of playing the game of hinting that the ball is in the court of Kiev and with not enough cards to play, but Kiev has certain cards to play, and we've been witnessing the unfolding energy debacle, if you will, with the stop of the transit of the Russian gas through the Ukrainian territory. And we know that some European Union members are very unhappy about that. And I would like to ask you about the broader picture. Certain cards Kiev doesn't possess. Certain cards it does. So what in your opinion, is something that Kiev might have at this point to actually help maintaining this European consensus?
Oh, all right. So you see, the cards that you were referring to would, in my view, more go in the position of breaking the European consensus, meaning that this could be disruptive in a sense. But of course, if it's about keeping the European consensus, all that Ukraine should really focus on is on the commitment to deliver a reform-minded and, utterly good governed country in the wake of a possible conflict, and of course, with a view to the reconstruction. I mean, what Europeans will be concerned by is issues that, as you well know, predated the war, which have to do with corruption and systemic corruption at that. So what Ukraine can can offer is reassurance that it will be in a position to welcome European support in a way that it is efficient, effective, and well governed. And this would be the one precondition to go any further on the road to enlargement, which, after all, is, for Europe at least, the key strategic priority in the medium to long term.
Fabrizio, in your assessment, is there a timeline for Ukraine to become the member of the European Union?
By definition, the EU does not give timelines and should not give timelines, because you'll appreciate if you say, for example, enlargement can become a reality by 2030, you are basically awarding, it's the equivalent of awarding a degree on the day you enroll. You can only award that degree when all the exams have been passed. So you cannot give a deadline for that reason. That being said, it is realistic to foresee a timeline anywhere between 6 to 9 years, which again is a very different time frame of any elected government and of any geopolitically active operation. So you see, when Russia thinks about Ukraine, they think in terms of invading it in 3 days. Then, of course, we know that has not worked out, but that is the way a geopolitical actor thinks. Europe thinks in years, and in years it's very difficult to hold the attention, the focus, and the resources and energies required. So this will be the biggest challenge, I think, both for Ukraine and for Europe.
Thank you for this, Fabrizio. And you mentioned NATO, and I wanted to shift to this topic because Donald Trump, the incoming president of the United States, mentioned that the member countries should increase their spendings on NATO and get it to 5% of their GDP. And I'm just wondering, could this lead, and obviously Europe is not, some European countries are not very excited about it. Could this lead to a scenario possibly when, for some European countries, NATO's membership becomes unsustainable?
Well, if it's a yes or no answer, I think the answer to that is no. Let me separate the two aspects of this. The first is the demand from the incoming administration of increasing defense spending. Now, this has been a constant, bipartisan constant in US policymaking for as long as I can remember. I was reminded of this watching, that remarkable figure of all the presidents lined up in the cathedral in Washington for the Carter funeral, where, it was Obama long before Trump. I remember a parting interview he gave to The Atlantic saying one of the biggest regrets of his presidency was that the Europeans were not in a position to take care of their own defenses. So this has been going on for a long time. And it is entirely fair of the US to ask, and if I may, it was one of the good outcomes, probably one of the very few good outcomes of the first Trump presidency, that it really shook Europeans out of their torpor when it comes to defense spending. So that's one side of the answer. If we get into that dynamic again in Europe, where we need to, even if it is animated by legitimate concerns and anxiety over whether the US will support or not, it is a good development. Now, we hear from the US administration, well, the defense spending we should no longer be talking about 2%, we should be talking about 5%. That's a different story. And it is one where, of course, it is unrealistic for the vast majority of EU, European allies. And then you sort of realize, or European leaders will be realizing, that is not a genuine demand as much as it is transactional posturing, which is to say, you are asking for that, knowing that Europeans cannot deliver on that in order to obtain something else. So that's sort of, it is disingenuous, while to say Europeans spending the correct amount had a positive effect. This new request is disingenuous because it entails different demands that are, in a majority of cases, completely unrelated to defense spending. And that should get Europeans worried. Now, will they leave then because they cannot fulfill that kind of demand? I don't know. I think they haven't left because they couldn't fulfill the previous demand. So they wouldn't leave because of that. It's not necessarily leaving is not necessarily the top priority. It would more be about then considering NATO as not operational anymore if those demands are not met, and that then you cannot expect Article 5 support or and the rest of it. So.
That's an excellent thought, Fabrizio, and just dovetailing on that I wanted to ask about your projections maybe for the direction of the European Union foreign policy in relation to the United States in the next 4 years.
Yes, this is an extremely fascinating discussion going on in many European capitals at the moment. Now, there has been a right-wing turn in European policy domestically before for anything foreign for several years now. And this turn has taken often rather reactionary connotations in terms of what kind of implications this would have for foreign policy. Top on my mind and in my list would be Hungary, where the right-wing turn of Orban has entailed an extremely disruptive and uncooperative posturing in relation to the European Union, as we all know. So everything relating to sanctions with Russia has become a problem. Everything becomes transactional as well. So, so that kind of consequence is negative. Then you have the other example, which is the country from where I'm connecting from, which is Italy. And there you have also had a right-wing turn, which, however, has delivered what is, by most accounts, a rather pragmatic posturing. So until now, and we are in the rather ironic situation for a country like Italy to be among the big countries in Europe, the most stable one. This is really unusual for Italy. But the irony of that is that the Prime Minister Meloni and her government have attained that objective by effectively playing a very pragmatic foreign policy. On the one hand, cooperating with Brussels institutions, something that Orban has not been able or willing to do. Probably both. And she has done this, Meloni, not by abiding to European diktats or demands as much as by imposing an agenda in Brussels. And this, you can see it, for example, on the migration agenda, where Italy has been driving the policy by having the so-called externalization of migration in countries like Egypt, Tunisia, and the rest of it. Now, this has also entailed, from Italy's side, a very constructive relation with the United States until now. Now, if you ask me, the country and more broadly Europe will be faced with a dilemma, which is, are you going to continue playing these two sides and trying to accommodate the American priorities and the European priorities, which is what, for example, Italy has been doing quite successfully, or you will make a choice? And the choice here will also be about a government and an administration in Washington, which is ideologically much more consistent to what your own domestic agenda is. So the way I frame this dilemma for countries like Italy, and more generally for this right-wing turn in European politics, also in France or Germany, where we have elections where right-wing parties are on the rise, the dilemma is, are you going to align yourself ideologically with an ally, which is the United States, that may be going in a very different direction that was going until recently? Or you will choose the not ideological, we may call it the geopolitical dimension, which is to say, look, we are going to, after all, choose Europe and put our chips on the European position and trying to strengthen the European position at the risk of alienating it from Washington. I am of the hope that a country like Italy will continue to play this game, if you like, between the two sides of the Atlantic. I am afraid that at some point it may no longer be able to do that. When Trump will put Italy in front of Italy or Europe in front of a dilemma, maybe tariffs, maybe AI regulation, maybe trade. So what are you going to choose? Are you going to choose Europe, or are you going to choose the ideological alignment with the US? So that, I think, is going to be the discussion.
Fabrizio, maybe, just maybe, an early litmus test for that is the issue of Greenland, because it became this geopolitical flashpoint almost right now. And this is the returning discussion. And you wrote about that in 2019 when Donald Trump suggested to buy Greenland. And we are seeing very interesting dynamic right now, because just in the latest news, Greenland's prime minister said that they're open for discussions with Washington. The Danish prime minister said that it tried to reach out to the incoming administration, but it's not until the inauguration, until after the inauguration, the discussion is going to happen. What does it signal us about Greenland's and Denmark's maybe priorities, intentions, and do we consider them to be now, under this pressure from the United States, on the same page about the future of Greenland?
I like the term litmus test. It is exactly that. It is an extreme case of something much bigger that I think is going to unfold in the coming weeks. Let me put it this way. The Greenland case, and more generally Arctic geopolitics, is a paradox. It is a paradox because countries such as Denmark and even Canada and the United States until recently would claim that it is a region that it is heavily regulated. There is a very strong, it's regulated by the international law of the sea, and the countries around the Arctic have agreed to settle any dispute peacefully. So this has been the image that some of the countries, particularly the Western one, have been living by over the past years. But the reality is very different. And the reality has been one of increasing geopolitical competition, because countries such as Russia, but even China, even though it's not a literal Arctic country, view the region strategically for reasons such as natural resources exploitation, and of course, shorter trade routes and the rest of it. So on the one hand, I think this and the Trump stunts, if you like, are a wake-up call, as in we Europeans, Americans, Canadians cannot talk about some of these issues, in particular Arctic security, in particular Greenland, as if we are in a situation of business as usual. We are not in a situation of business as usual. So Trump telling you this is about American national security is a wake-up call. And I would encourage my friends in Denmark to I have a history from Denmark, so that's who I'm referring to. I would wish that they could take it in this spirit, as if, this is a wake-up call for all of us. Now, will Trump eventually go forth in a direction that is disruptive and disruptive of anything that the world order post 1945 stands for in terms of sovereignty of nations and inviolability of borders? I don't know. I somehow don't think and still hope that this is a sort of a provocation for obtaining, more measured and measurable results, which to my mind would actually be quite plausible. And these measurable results would go in the direction of somehow encouraging and pushing the discussion regarding Greenland's own independence, which is a conversation that has been going on for a very long time. And it has always remained bilateral with Denmark. But of course, the entrance of a new party may spark a new dynamic to that discussion. But then, of course, should Greenland go in that direction, then you can initiate a conversation about how Greenland can improve its own standing by allying itself and gaining advantages, whether from the US or from Denmark, or from both. I mean, I'm still hoping we're not talking about an occupation of Greenland by the United States, and that still this is a provocation. But my conclusion, and I hope this was made sufficiently clear, is that when the Danes and us more broadly think that Trump behaves as a real estate dealer, saying, I want to buy Greenland, that's not what this is about. I think we should try and start to see this as a wake-up call that the way we understand the international order is no longer there. And, hopefully we will be in a position to adjust accordingly, also through Trump, if possible.
This is fascinating, Fabrizio. I just wanted to ask one more question, maybe in the broader context about the Arctic issue, because you've dealt with that so much. And we're talking about the resource competition. We're talking about China's involvement, just as you mentioned, in the region. And the question is, maybe in this new world order, do you feel that competition for Arctic resources can remain peaceful?
Well, this is something that I hope it will remain peaceful, but it is something that is not started to happen 2 weeks ago when Trump made the announcement, or not even 5 years ago when he made his first stunt on Greenland. I mean, remember the Russian expedition that planted a flag on the seabed of the Arctic. That was already in 2007. So we're talking about almost 20 years now, 18 years. And so the idea that we are going in the direction of a militarization of the Arctic geopolitics and a securitization of Arctic geopolitics is not new. It is already happening. Now, will this lead us towards a scramble for resources in Greenland? This will probably be about settling disagreements such as the one we are experiencing now with the United States in a sufficiently pragmatic and effective way. The way that Denmark handled the Russian stunt back in 2007 was by issuing a declaration in agreement with the other Arctic powers called the Ilulissat Declaration, which essentially ensured that all the parties would settle the matters of delimitation of the seabed peacefully. I think it's fair to say the time in which you could settle such a things through multilateral declarations is no longer there. So you rather need agreements on the ground that preserve the peace more than anything else. And again, and here is the hopeful me, my hopeful self, the present crisis, quote unquote, with Trump can paradoxically help to wake us up to that reality. That would be in itself a good outcome.
Fabrizio, probably my last question, if you could just in a few words, if you could give a definition for the possible new European posture. We talk about it so much. We talk about it in the realm of security. We talk about it in the realm of energy security. So I don't know if it's going to be your hopeful self or maybe more kind of your pessimistic self, but how would you characterize that in a few words, the new European posture?
Yeah, that would be a bit the pessimistic, I'm afraid. So I think for quite some time now, Europe has operated on the assumption that it could unleash something that we call the Brussels effect, which is really about trying to influence and actually coerce countries and entities outside Europe by means of its own regulatory power, normative power. I think the limits of that kind of Brussels effect are becoming apparent to everybody in Europe here. We know that that Brussels effect is reaching its limits because it's all about whether a foreign power or a foreign actor is interested or not in doing business with Europe. And I think the more we go on, the more foreign powers might conclude that, you know what, we might not care to do business with Europe if they don't change their ways. Have we registered that message? I'm not sure. So that is my non-optimistic self saying that we need to be much more pragmatic about our own posture in the world and understand that maybe we need to be more transactional. We need to be more Trumpian, in a sense, about the way we understand relations with outside power, rather than trying to benignly impose a model that may no longer be that attractive.